Hello. We are here to talk about housing and specifically low-cost housing options that at this point in Chico are pretty much non-existent. We have a growing number of people in our community who are homeless and living in our shelter and transitional housing systems or on our streets instead of actually living in housing. So that's what we're here to talk about. In 2017, we did a point-in-time survey and counted over 1,200 people without stable housing in Chico, 1,900 in Butte County, and this count was just done in one day. So I am here today with an incredible Chico local. I like to call him one of Chico's many hidden gems. He is the founder of Location Arts, and his name is Mike Trolinder. Mike, why don't you tell us what Location Arts is?
Location Arts is a talent collaborative focused on the business, the block, and the district. And we're really focused on planning and design, and the way that we can build an American culture from planning and design. And instead of just trying to get the job done, we're actually trying to figure out how to make it a better place to live in.
And what kind of projects have you been involved in locally?
Well, recently the Secret Trail Brewery on Myers and the reinvention of the Myers district as a maker's district and a place to create makers and people to come together. And downtown, I've been a big downtown advocate for years, and Nantucket was my turnaround project. I started downtown with the Upper Crust Bakery. It was my early project, and over the years it's like on phase 20, and it has a very interesting story in that the owner of the Upper Crust Bakery wanted it to be the downtown living room, and she was very successful at that. It's been a really incredible piece of downtown. The big part about downtown really is we've worked for years on policy downtown and including sidewalk dining. We worked for years to get those rules through, and we're seeing the change of that. Downtown is slowly shifting to a better place to be.
Yeah. And so today we're going to talk about our community's low-cost housing stock. Where did it go? We used to have low-cost housing stock, right? And so can you tell me a little bit about the history here?
Well, you're probably referring to what I always like to call about is that missing bottom. And we did have a bottom to our housing at one time, and that downtown Chico had more than 4,000 SROs.
What's an SRO? Can you explain that? A
single room occupancy. And oftentimes it was either in a hotel or a rooming house, but there was over 4,000 of them here. And somehow those have disappeared, along with lots of other housing that they used to be ghettos or slums or bad places, but they're gone. And they did house a person. It gave them a place to call home. And so what you see on the street today of all this homeless housing is the majority of that would have had a place to live. But we purged the homeless or that type of housing right out of our city, not only in Chico but across the country.
And when we're talking an SRO, what price range are you talking about for monthly rent for an SRO right now?
Well, the thing about SROs is single room occupancy is very small. So the whole tiny house movement of tiny is really. SRO may start at 150 square feet up to 250 square feet, and so the idea of an SRO for the bottom would be less than $250 a month in rent.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people that are homeless that do have income, their income is about, doesn't really go much over $900 a month. It can be as low as $300 a month. So that sounds about right for some of those higher income earners or for people that are living on the streets or in our shelter system. I have a question about something that Mayor Sean Morgan said at a recent council meeting, and he said that the cost of housing does not drive homelessness. What do you think about that?
I think he's completely wrong, and Actually, I think that Sean believes that the homeless is a defect, and these are defective people, and instead of working on the idea of creating homes, that we're working on ways to push back on homelessness and kind of managing the problem instead of curing the problem.
And also another big thing that people are talking about right now is ADUs, or auxiliary dwelling units. I'm going to read a quote from somebody named Cole Peterson, who's the author of a new book called Backdoor Revolution, The Definitive Guide to ADU Development. And this is from a January 18 article on City Lab called The Granny Flats Are Coming. He says ADUs allow people housing flexibility over time. ADUs use fewer resources like gas and electricity due to their size, and because they're often built in walkable, bikeable areas, their residents generate less of an environmental impact. They bring more housing to an area organically, and the city doesn't have to build new infrastructure to accommodate this. What do you think about this? I know that California has recently passed legislation to make ADU development easier, and we're seeing larger communities across California move very quickly in response to that. What are we doing here in Chico? Are ADUs an option? A, can you explain what they are? B, can you tell us where the barriers were before and why it's so hard for somebody to put a granny flat in the back of their, in the back of their house on their lot? And then what's our city doing to respond to this?
That's a lot of questions. I'll try to get
get
through them. But an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, and there was a time before we created planning the way we know it today that you could build a mother-in-law unit or a granny flat behind your house by just building it. You didn't have to have a permit. You were able to do that. And as planning moved into single-use types of planning, like neighborhoods of just 3-bedroom homes, and we pushed all the manufacturing to manufacturing zones, and so we planned by zone. Is that we planned all those things out. They weren't allowed, and so over the last 20 years we've been fighting to get those back. And 10 years ago we made a little bit of progress, but the state comes along and pushes back on all of the opposition and says ADUs are now allowed, and they give a very elegant solution to all the pushback that says there are no reasons to not allow them other than just a very few, and so the cities and governments across California have to respond to that legislation, and they are. And here in Chico, last night a planning commission meeting was the first public review of the ADU law, and I think what's really important about that is that the city responded in a very good way, because the city actually sets the size of the smallest size of an ADU, and in Chico, California, an ADU can be 150 square feet, and so that is exactly the target for getting people off the street and into homes and being where they can live responsibly in their own place, and so we have the chance of here in Chico to create a few thousand ADUs actually that would replace what we didn't do for the last 40 years, and begin to work through some of these issues of where people are going to live.
Right. And I have a question for you, because you and I have talked about this quite a bit about who could live in ADUs and what kind of problems could this solve? And something that you always push back on me is the problem isn't just about people who are currently homeless. The problem is also about people who are coming into homelessness, because housing is getting more expensive. There's been mass evictions in our community. And, as people get older, there are less options that are affordable for folks. So what kind of folks do you think can be housed in ADUs, or is it a good fit for? Go ahead with that one.
Well, the idea of the missing bottom actually comes from the missing. I'll start here first, but the idea of the missing bottom actually comes from the missing middle, in that the middle class is feeling the housing crunch, and they're moving into what was lower end housing. So they're moving down in order to get their rents, or they're adding density to a unit to be able to be affordable. So they're displacing the missing bottom a little bit, but the missing bottom is the piece that here in Chico that we could solve very quickly, and that is a 150 square foot to 250 square foot designed ADU is really a submarket ADU, and that not a lot of people are going to want to move in there, and so the idea that the ADU law in California says that you can build a 1,200 square foot down to, and here in Chico you can build a 1,200 square foot down to 150 square foot ADU. The idea that we're just going to serve a market that has the money to go to a 600 square foot or rent a 700 square foot ADU isn't going to solve the problem of homeless. We need to get ADUs down to where they're very small, very compact, very efficient to build, and we need many of them.
And what do you? I've heard definitely a little bit of pushback or questioning about how do you make sure that ADUs are affordable, or do we need to make sure ADUs are affordable? And then my second question is, some people talk about Airbnb and how this ADU law going to instead of helping solve the housing crisis to create more housing, it will actually just create more Airbnb units.
Well, I'm not sure if it's state or city, but there is a transit element to the ADU law that says that they have to be rented for at least 30 days. And so that helps to cure some of that. But the other really comes from the cost of putting an ADU together. If we're going to have impact fees there's no reason that a 1,200 square foot ADU shouldn't pay its fair share of impact fees. But when you come down to the 150 square feet, and the city could forgive all those fees for the idea of trading those fees for housing the bottom.
If you wanted to build a 150 square foot ADU in the back of your house now to house, say, a family member that might be at risk of homelessness, what would it cost you in impact fees?
That's uncertain right now. That's what the city's trying to. What we're advocating for at you and others is that those size units would be zero, that there would be no fees, and that even the permit fee would be reduced in order to spur the idea that people who want to help solve the missing bottom or the homeless housing can actually do it. Because right now our hands are tied. There's nothing we can do. But your backyard could be shared with someone very easily, and so that's really the big piece of that is to unleash that power of people who want to solve the problem and unconstrain them.
If I could for a second, I'd love to go back to something you said earlier, which was this idea that people look at homelessness and what they sometimes see, and often actually some powerful people see this as a problem with defective people. Can you expand on that and maybe tell us what you think instead?
Well, it comes from my own experience of understanding homeless. There was a time that I thought they were defective people also. And so I know what they're talking about is that it's easy to judge and be judgmental and to make claims that these people are destroying our community, but they're actually part of our community. They're a piece of the fabric, and so there's the over majority of folks are sympathetic to the homeless, but they still believe that they're defective in some way. But the reality is that if we could house them, they would just be normal defects that we all have. They would just be regular people who have an oddity or an interest but we can't get but on the street they're just reduced to really a survival lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's what that's what the street does to you.
Yeah.
It's a survival mode.
Yeah. I read a quote the other day from a person that said that remarkably imperfect people are housed all the time. And it's interesting from an advocate point of view, how much easier and more effective it is to help someone with these services that they need when they are housed. And so I think that's a really interesting thing. Can I ask you one question as we get towards the end of what we're talking about? What is your dream project, your dream SRO project for Chico? What does that look like?
Well, actually, I've been working on that.
I know.
Thanks for. It's more than one SRO project. It's a type of SRO that really responds to grouping people who want to live together, and so a 3-story SRO may be 20 small rooms to a floor, and that floor is self-supporting in the idea that these people take care of themselves, just like we want to. We want to take care of ourselves, and so the idea really is to look at the new age SRO and how that works to today. And so an SRO may be the third floor may be an elderly group of people, and the second floor may be a younger group or a mixed group. But the idea really of an SRO is market based, so that they don't have to be all subsidized. And we're seeing in the U.S. now that there are market based SROs that come to the market, so that somebody who wants to live small and fractionally, where they're not consuming so much, can actually live reasonably. And so the idea of Chico is to create that, is to build our first SRO, market rate SRO here. Now, the reason I bring up market rate SROs is because if you can build market rate SROs, then they're very easy to subsidize. So if you wanted to subsidize a person in an SRO, which is what we used to do, is that grandma would send a check for somebody that you could actually make a difference. Right now, housing is so expensive that we can't subsidize our own families outside of our living spaces. So my dream really is that single room occupancy living comes here to Chico.
And what do we need to do as a community, or what do you think listeners need to do to get involved in this kind of effort that you're talking about? Well,
it really comes back to how we want to live as a compact city, because an SRO really needs to be well placed. You can't put them out to the edge of town because they need to be walkable. And so we need to look at how our zoning, our planning, so that they're allowable in the more urban areas of town, and get our SROs are allowed in Chico, but we don't have a code for them. So we have to go all the way back through to create what an SRO is, how it's allowed, the square footages. We have a long way to go. And for a private developer to push that uphill is a lot of work. So the next step really is to start with the city and go through the regulatory changes to what an SRO is here in Chico.
Yeah, I know that mixed use is often talked about as a really exciting thing to be able to live on top of a coffee shop or something like that. And I know that downtown, it sounds like we're building some apartments above Pete's, the old Pete's, but it sounds like those are going to be really expensive. Where can these SROs that are above businesses live? Can they live downtown? Could we have affordable SROs downtown?
Well, interesting, there still are SROs downtown.
Is there?
Yeah, there is. They're not used, but there are vacant upstairs. There's a building on Main Street close to 9th that has 21 SROs that have been full of dust no one's lived in them for 45 years.
Wow.
And they're sitting there. And so those are, and they're just sitting there. There's probably a couple of hundred left in downtown Chico SROs. But there's ADA issues for the state ties your hands about using those because you got to get up and down. But so that's my there's a way through this, and but we have to want it. We have to know that the option of not housing people in single room occupancy or in some small form is people on the street. Mm-hmm. So let's choose what do we want? Mm-hmm. And I don't want people on the street. Nobody does. The mayor doesn't want people on the street. He may be wrong about why they're there, but he also can do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I think we are getting pretty close to running out of time. 5 minutes. So I want to take this time to say thank you so much, Mike, for being here. This is an amazing conversation. I think it's really special because it brings in this kind of private developer world and almost like private thinking to a conversation that has largely been put in the public sector. So I also want to give a shout out to Safe Space Winter Shelter, which is our community's seasonal low barrier emergency shelter. They are currently on their last few weeks of the shelter season and are being thrown a benefit show tonight. It is a CD release show for a benefit compilation called Out from the Cold, featuring local rock and rollers, The Empty Gate, Sex Hogs 2, and Splatter Party. All of the proceeds of this recording and show will go to funding Safe Space. And there is also a limited edition hand screen poster created by a Bay Area artist who created Green Day's Dookie album. All the poster proceeds will also go to Safe Space Winter Shelter. And then I am also one of the speakers at next Wednesday's Slow Theater event. It's called Chico Speaks, and it is the People's State of the Union. This event is going to be at Cafe Coda, and the theme for this year is where are we going and where have we been? I'll definitely be speaking about housing and some of the issues that you and I have talked about today, but I'll be there with David Welch, Anna Moore, Malama McNeil, and Reverend Jim Peck. They will also be speakers. So that, again, is next Wednesday, February 7th, 6:30 p.m. at Cafe Coda.